Polygon episode number 52 on this wonderful Friday, March 27th, 2015. Fairly tranquil weather across the area. John Wheeler is our guest today. He is from WDAY and WDAZ in North Dakota. We'll get more to him here shortly, but we're going to start off with a little bit of weather news. I'm sure most of the people that are watching this remember earlier in the week that we had some severe weather across the southern plains and lower Mississippi Valley in Oklahoma and Arkansas, with a total of 7 tornadoes reported, pretty much with one death in Sand Springs, with other tornadoes in Clifty, Arkansas, Berryville, Arkansas, Warrigal, Arkansas, and then more at Inola and Peggs, Oklahoma. Which, again, this is still very under average for the United States. Last time I checked, 163 is the average through March. 2015 so far, we've only had 36, which is only 23% of the average. So you could call it a tornado drought, but
I don't think anybody's complaining about the tornado drought.
Yeah, I think the only people that are really complaining would be the storm chasers, but hey.
It's not even the time of the year for the storm chasers. If we're 23% come the end of April, then the complaints will start.
And I think we got video now from John. There we go. Right on.
All right.
But anyway, the main story that we'll be focusing on today would be the tornado that struck Moore, Oklahoma. I don't know how many tornadoes. Jeff, do you know how many tornadoes they've seen?
I know when they were doing the surveys that they pretty much pluralized it as saying there was probably more than one during that time when it was on the ground from the far southern part of Oklahoma City through Moore. And I happened to see video of it, and it would suggest that there was probably more than one, because more or less for the fact, I hate more and more. From what I saw, the first time I saw it on video from a helicopter, this was, I believe, on KFOR's stream, which is on YouTube. It was on YouTube within like 6 hours. That's the best thing about severe weather coverage. It's always on YouTube somewhere, somehow, not long after.
And I did.
They showed dust. It was pretty much what they said, according to Mike Morgan, who we love to hate on this program, said it was a concentrated area of dust. He said it was likely a gustnado. But then it started doing power flashes, so it was a tornado. Don't know the difference between that or whatever, but there seemed to be, it didn't seem to be in a concentrated area. It seemed to be there was one here, then over here, and then it was to the point that at one point the people in the helicopter said, you need to move over, look to the left with the camera up in the helicopter. Well, before they could do that, the camera zoomed in on a tornado that was right in front of the helicopter camera, and the other person was looking at another one. So there must have been at least, it was either a multiple vortex tornado that was really large, or it was small little tornadoes that were just going all over the place. Wouldn't be surprised if it was multiple vortex, but almost, when you think about it, they say, whoa, multiple vortex, that's rare. Really, it's not. Multiple vortex tornadoes happen quite often.
And John can probably give us some input on this, but I know as a TV meteorologist during severe weather coverage and having those live shots, when you're standing in front of a green screen giving warning information, you only have this little monitor over here showing what's being shown live on TV, and it's kind of hard to differentiate between the gustnado and the tornado because, for one, you're so far away from the screen and you can't really see high quality. So, I mean, it's kind of hard to give judgment, but the guys in the helicopter hopefully providing more input. I'll let John, if you have any experience with that.
Yeah, well, no doubt. You're also, when you're on the air, you know, you got people talking to you about what's coming up next, and you know, it's kind of hard. Sometimes it's just hard to make a you have to be thinking about a lot of things at once, is what I'm trying to say. It didn't look like a multiple vortex tornado. I like your idea, Jeff, of a lot of little bitty tornadoes. There was obviously some, some gust front opportunities there, and some spin up opportunities. And I don't think the damage was really indicative of anything really super powerful. So whatever you want to call it, I mean, rising air rotates, so you can give it whatever name you want, but it seemed like it was just sort of outflow gust front generated spin-ups. So whatever call you want to call them.
I did see that Norman did, or at least their preliminary damage results, they gave that tornado in Moore a high-end EF1 rating with a large area of 70 to 80 mile per hour RFD winds with embedded brief and weak tornadoes. They will be confirming that over the next couple of days as they look more at the damage, so it could be either a high-end EF1, low-end EF2. Currently, they're saying high-end EF1 based off that. But definitely, Moore has seen its fair share of tornadoes over the last 20 years. Jeff can probably give me a better number on this, but of course, they saw the one in 2013.
They actually had two in 2013, May 20th, EF5, and then they had one the same day as El Reno, which most people forget.
Yep.
Yeah, they've definitely. I think I saw a stat somewhere as I was looking through social media that they were showing all of the tornadoes as hit Moore. And I was talking to a friend that lives in Moore, and pretty much was saying, I don't know why I live here anymore. They didn't sustain a lot of damage, but I think they had a little bit of roof damage, but definitely got lucky from that. But anyway, feeding off of that, we go into the story of the day. That had meteorologists, NWS, media, commercial, whatever, everybody is getting into it. Centered around this piece right here that was published today by AccuWeather Enterprises, describing the Moore, Oklahoma tornado. And I'm only going to read excerpts from this. I'll post a link, and I'll have some other different views also. But pretty much what the centers around was that the National Weather Service in Norman issued the tornado much later than what AccuWeather Enterprises issued for their commercial vendors. As I quote here, 6:20 p.m. AccuWeather gave their warning, which was in effect until 7 p.m. And then finally at 6:32, 12 minutes after AccuWeather gave their warning, the National Weather Service issued only a severe thunderstorm warning when the tornado touched down at 6:35 p.m. They say this gave them nearly 15 minutes of lead time. The National Weather Service did not issue a tornado warning for Moore until 6:43 as the tornado was ending. And they go on to describe multiple, I guess you could say, unfavorable things that the NWS and SPC did, namely issuing the severe thunderstorm watch with low tornado probabilities and very low EF2 plus tornado probabilities. And they were saying, as a result of the model and other data at 4:27 p.m., our clients and more received a quote-unquote critical weather forecast that explicitly forecasted the potential for tornadoes in central Oklahoma. And that's kind of all I'll say about that. They continue to show some tweets that the National Weather Service in Norman posted, saying at 5:54 p.m., storms west of OKC are being undercut by cold air, blowing dust on the ground, moving away from the storm. The tornado potential was very low. 6:08 p.m., there are no tornado warnings in effect west of OKC. Now, if you remember at the time, I believe it was KFOR that was showing the live shot of the tornado, and this also goes on to show the hook echo on the FAA radar that Mike Smith, who authored this piece, says they don't believe the National Weather Service looked at that TDWR data from the airport and rather relied on the WSR 88D there in Norman. But effectively, this got mixed responses. I know on Twitter, the meteorological community has been going on all day discussing it. I've seen multiple articles. I think the best article that kind of sums up what my personal beliefs would be from the Capital Weather Gang, pretty much saying AccuWeather rips Weather Service for dismissing tornado threat in Oklahoma Wednesday and delayed warning, and I'll give links to these later on. But this brochure did not go down well amongst many. I'm trying to stay within my means, but they did not like what the brochure pretty much said. And just reading off some quotes here, Steve Miller, who worked for WTT, again, not representative of what WTT believes, he published an article. I can't share the headline over the air, but I'll again share the link to it. And quoting that article, with a blatant disregard for peers in the industry, the meteorology profession, and the government agency responsible for supplying them with raw data at no cost to them, AccuWeather released this promotional piece, slamming the ability of the SPC and the NWS's ability to accurately predict tornadoes. And I've seen multiple articles. This one pretty much sums it up, really, from the Capital Weather Gang, and there are a lot more. Steve Miller also said, "I'm continually amazed by the blatant disrespect meteorologists have for their peers." Greg Carbon did address some items. He did say that the tornado watch was appropriate for the situation instead of the severe thunderstorm watch. And he did believe, from, I quote here, "from a practically perfect perspective, a more accurate outlook could have 10% significant tornado probabilities over the Tulsa area, and with the 5% over OKC being fine. But again, I quote, not sure end result would be any different, because knowing people, they don't. Severe thunderstorm versus tornado watch, you never know what they'll do." Mike Smith, he does not believe that, or rather, he believes that NWS should be held accountable like any other U.S. government agency. Somebody tweeted at him, "AccuWeather going after the NWS over more is small dice compared to what Rick Santorum tried to do in 2005 with the NWS Duties Act, which pretty much fell short in Congress because everybody hated it, to say the least, as it was a relatively dumb bill. Personal opinion again." He replied to that saying, he's having an interesting conversation about poor warning times and more. Had that act passed, the NWS would be focused on warnings. Oh well. Many in this discussion are defending an awful performance, no accountability. And he said, how was WFO Springfield held accountable for the catastrophic performance in Joplin? If you remember that tornado from 2011, I believe. He went on about how the Norman office took unprovoked attacks on AccuWeather. Hard to believe that had to have been behind internal affairs, pretty much. But he believes 8 tornado warnings does not equal severe thunderstorm watch, and again, Greg Carbon agreed with that. But that pretty much sums that up. I know Jim Cantori, you can believe your own kind of way on that, as you know, AccuWeather TV is rolling out, and they're competing with the Weather Channel, which gotta love business. But Jim Cantori said, still trying to figure out which team AccuWeather is playing for. The Weather Ready Nation logo takes the cake, because this brochure completely on favoring the NWS's actions has the wonderful Weather Ready Nation logo here at the bottom, which Jim Cantori seemed to like. But one tweet that pretty much gave that brochure link pretty much blew up. And before we discuss this, I'm just going to give my view here. He did have some points. Mike Smith did have some points, but my overall opinion is that using one event to grade the tornado accuracy of a weather forecast office and using a promotional piece to pretty much throw them under the bus and pretty much tell, if this became public, if the public looked at this, pretty much telling the public, don't trust the National Weather Service, go through AccuWeather. Pay us and we'll give you your forecast. And he says here, and I've gone off before on this, I know in the last show with Jason, they showed this updraft helicity parameter here on the map on this promotional thing, and he captions forecast tracks of dangerous thunderstorms more than 7 hours before the Moore tornado, which I remind you is just updraft helicity, but they call it a forecast. So again, just to kind of sum up what I believe, he did have some points. I did believe Norman kind of missed the boat there on a lot of warnings because I was watching it myself. I was chatting with a few of my colleagues and a few of other weather enthusiasts, and we all kind of agreed there was rotation there. But again, that's the National Weather Service call. But we all saw rotation, and KFOR had confirmed tornado, and we were all saying, "Where's the warning? Where's the warning? Where's the warning?" We were watching the confirmed tornado. There was still no tornado warning out. I know they issued a tornado warning for Oklahoma City before Moore. That got canceled, honestly, within 10 minutes, and then Moore got issued after that. But again, just to sum up, I don't think we should be using one event to grade the accuracy of a single NWS office. Jeff, I'll throw it to you on your thoughts on all of this.
Yeah, the thing that we discussed this before we started and before John came on. Something somewhat similar happened in Iowa back in 2006, where the Storm Prediction Center issued a severe thunderstorm watch. Now, things are different now with social science and all this stuff, et cetera, that severe thunderstorm watch. What people keep forgetting, severe thunderstorms can and usually produce tornadoes with little or no warning. Evidently, Mike Smith doesn't realize that because there are some cases, even today, where there is severe thunderstorm warnings, and they list in the warning now tornadoes, especially spin-ups, are possible, because if they were to issue tornado warnings for every little spin-up, and this has been a problem before, they would issue the warning, and by the time they did, that spin-up's gone. The rotation is gone, then they cancel the warning, then the tornado warning's a false alarm, and that was the problem the Weather Service has had for so many years, no matter what office it was, between Fargo Grand Forks, where John is, or Des Moines, or the Quad Cities, or Norman, or Birmingham, or wherever. The false alarm ratio was too high because you can't catch every little spin-up. Well, in this case, with the Moore tornado, now this doesn't discount the ones in the Tulsa area, Sand Springs, and all those. Those were on the ground. That was most of them were from two thunderstorms, one that went through Arkansas and the one that went through Tulsa. Most of those tornadoes, the rotation was there almost the entire time. You knew it was a tornado. They issued the warnings, and the tornadoes were verified. Moore, on the other hand, there were several tornadoes west of Oklahoma City, but they were these spin-ups. They would just last like a minute and then disappear. And there were some cases with right before the tornado in Moore, and there's video of this, you could see dust outflowing from the thunderstorm that was near the Will Rogers Airport, which is northwest of Moore. You could see the dust flowing out. It was not a tornado. It was outflow. So you mean to tell me that a storm, if it's outflowing, that is not indicating for tornadoes are going to develop. when you have an outflow. Well, it just so happened to be, from what I've seen, what ended up happening, the storm actually got rooted into the boundary layer, and right as it did, that's when the tornado formed. It formed on the northern edge of the outflow that was moving south behind the tornado. So the tornado actually formed pretty much on the front side of the storm. It's not like a typical storm where you get the rain, the hail, and then the tornado. In this case, the tornado was the first thing you got. And then it rained and then hailed and all that stuff. But the storm is what I would consider to be, most of the storms were behind the front. So they were what you would call elevated. Well, the minute the storm, that little piece got right to the boundary layer, it immediately had enough rotation, it produced tornadoes. And it did for quite some time. But the problem that I think happened is if you're thinking the storm is outflowing, it's not going to produce a tornado even if it's rotating. How do you know where the boundary layer is? And then the minute it hits the boundary layer, the tornado forms. This is going to have to be heavily studied, and it's probably going to be heavily studied, about how this storm was behind the front. The minute it hit the front, because the storms were moving faster than the front. It hit the front, the storm became down to the boundary layer, tornado formed, and it was moving southeast, which most of the storms were moving due east. So I can't really blame the Weather Service for doing it, given what they probably were thinking was happening, and given what they had been seeing, that it was outflowing. You don't think a storm that's outflowing is going to produce tornadoes. But the minute that outflow hits the boundary layer, especially when it was in a comma head, there were two comma heads, one in Oklahoma County, which they did issue a tornado warning for, but nothing happened. And then there was this next one down in Moore, which the minute it showed up on radar, it was on the ground. And that was when the storm got into the boundary layer and the tornado formed. And then the thing that I found that does concern me, and this is where I would go a little bit off, is that the tornado's on the ground and the Weather Service did nothing. There were so many people on the ground. There was 2 helicopters that I know of. I don't know if KOCO has a helicopter, but I know Channel 4 and Channel 9 was on it in Oklahoma City. They saw the power flushes. You could see the little vortices. I'm thinking, I don't know if the Weather Service must, because I know I've been to the Weather Service office in the Quad Cities. They watch local TV. They know what's going on. So I don't know if they were too tunnel visioned at their screens and not tunnel visioned at the TV, seeing that there's a tornado on the ground, that they need to do something. Because, and God help them, the TV people, at least they were like, there's a tornado on the ground, here's a picture of it. I mean, it comes to the point that, is AccuWeather going to show you a tornado video? I doubt it. They're just wanting you to get their stuff. Doesn't mean they're going to show you, like local TV will show you, here's pictures from a storm chaser, which would have been really hard in a town like Moore, or in a case with John's place like Grand Forks or Fargo. You're not going to see much if you're on the ground in the tornado. If it's like Moore, is a big ball of dust, and that's all you see. But from the air, you can see it. It's there. Why there was no tornado warning? I think from what they were given, they probably thought it wasn't going to happen. But I mean, there's some pros and cons, but it's going to have to be heavily studied for what's going on. So, John, what do you think about what's all going on with this?
Well, I've been a broadcast meteorologist now since 1984. It'll be 31 years in September. And so I've worked with Weather Service outfits in Iowa and up here in the Northern Plains now for a long, long time. And, you know, sure, the situation should be reviewed, and there's no doubt that Oklahoma City, Norman, probably missed the ball on this one. But it was, just like you said, it was easy to see how they would have gotten in a mindset that this wasn't a tornado. Why they weren't watching the streams of the chasers, why they weren't watching the choppers, I don't know. You know, that's for them to answer and for them to explore. But don't you think it's a little disingenuous for AccuWeather to put this in a You know, I'm not an AccuWeather client, and I likely never will be. I've never been a big fan of their products, not to completely diss the outfit, but it's just never been a direction I've wanted my company to go. And things like this are, you know, smell a little bit, don't you think?
I would agree. I mean, personally, as soon as I saw this, I was honestly kind of furious because they were throwing the NWS under the bus as a promotional tool.
Yeah.
Pretty much saying, don't trust them, come to us, pay us, we're more accurate than them. When the NWS, we all know, is that they should get paid more for what they're worth.
Well, what they need to do is there needs to be more people at these Weather Service offices during events, and with the government budgets the way they are, that's probably not going to happen. And yeah, they'd say, well, we should just have them do warnings. Well, in hindsight, they wanted to cut the Weather Service staff so badly, they could have done even worse if that had happened. So you have you have to take what they give you, but I think there needs to be more people that know what they're doing and know what they're supposed to be looking for.
Let's not forget Oklahoma City Norman has issued an awful lot of good tornado warnings over the years.
Yes.
I would agree with. See, that's what ticked me off, honestly, because why don't they publish something about all of the good tornado warnings they've issued, all of the lives they've saved? Why they focus on a single event and they use it as a promotional tool to get people to buy their product? One event from one office, when I am sure if you go back and look, OUN has done a terrific job. We could go back and look at all of the events they've done in the past 5 to 10 years, and they've done a terrific job. And I like how Mike Smith seemed to kind of support the, if you remember, John, the National Weather Service Duties Act of 2005, with Rick Santorum bringing that to the floor. Pretty much what the goal of that was to curtail perceived government competition with commercial weather services, and pretty much telling them, focus on your job, you can't do anything else, and you can only disseminate that data in the case of severe weather, and pretty much making it all muchly commercialized, which was unfair. And Mike Smith continually seems to think that personally, I never have liked Mike Smith, and this is a lot of personal bias against him because there's a lot of things that I've not liked about him in the past. A lot of times he does not favor the National Weather Service, and I understand because he's working for his company and he has to make money for his company and be self-sustaining, and so be it. But in the process, did he really have to make a pamphlet not really describing his products, really, but pretty much showing half of it being all of the things that NWS did wrong? He showed, which I don't agree with, low chance for tornadoes. There were 8 tornadoes, and total severe thunderstorm warnings, there were 40. 40 severe thunderstorm warnings, 8 tornadoes. I mean, you could argue which should be which, and Greg Carbon seemed to think it should have been a tornado watch, but really, if you get under a severe thunderstorm watch, you should just keep your eyes on the sky. I'm not saying you shouldn't blame that watch as the reason for people not being informed, apparently. Now, the warnings on that end, I don't have an explanation for that. That would have, like John said, that would have to be something Norman would look into, as I don't understand how they couldn't. I would want to know why that warning wasn't issued. Did they just not know, or that's something for them to review themselves? But that's the only point I can really agree with him on him, and I think it is terrible that he publishes a pamphlet pretty much trashing the National Weather Service and no one has agreed with it. I mean, I haven't seen any support for this on Twitter other than Mike Smith. I mean, it is all the weather community has pretty much downright said that's terrible. You are dissing the same people in your profession. You're not improving the profession.
Right.
Which isn't that what we want to do as a weather community? Is improve and save more lives and not make this turn into a business model that trashes. And you shouldn't even call it a competitor. I mean, it is the National Weather Service. These people have been saving lives since I don't even know how long. I thought it was terrible. That's just my view. Some people may see.
That's not to be said, guys, that the situation shouldn't be reviewed. I mean, this is a minor thing, but one minor issue that I've always had with the Weather Service, and it's not with the Weather Service specific, but just with the process, is that they do their own tornado verification. They do their own surveys, and that's, of course, in the interest of science. That's a good thing, but sometimes I have often wondered if there isn't some creative verification sometimes of non-tornadoes events, that sort of thing. There seems to be, up here I've noticed just a couple of times when tornado warnings were issued and the actual weather seemed to be much more like just a wind system, where they've found a couplet and found a little localized bit of wind damage and called it a tornado when I was a little suspicious of it. You wonder if sometimes they didn't engage in some creative verification. But yeah, in the grand scheme of things, this is just clearly an effort being made to generate business, and it's a cheap shot.
Yeah, and the thing is, I fear that what this is going to end up. Okay, I'll say this. I'll try to get my act together. With AccuWeather and all the stuff, where do they get their data from? They get it from the Weather Service. Where do they get their radars from? The Weather Service. You want to diss the Weather Service, Weather Service may just take their data away from them and say, try to do your own darn weather forecast, because we're not going to use our stuff. Because the Weather Service could do that. They give it out for free, but if you're going to start trashing them, find your own darn way to do it. I tell them. If you're so accurate, do your own forecast. Get your own ASOS stations. Get your own radars up.
And yeah, that's kind of what Steve Miller, he had his blog pretty much kind of alluded to that. NOAA is the ultimate supplier of 80% of the raw data private U.S. weather companies utilize to make forecasts. In addition, NOAA is a federally funded entity that is no way competitor to private weather companies. Furthermore, weather agencies under the NOAA umbrella have zero recourse for scandal mongering. There are more tactful ways to boast one's product without ultimately biting the hand that feeds you. There's no way a business person wrote this piece. With a little bit of sarcasm in there. But, yeah, I mean, say, I like John said, that pretty much what sums it up is it's a cheap shot. I think they could have done a better way to, if they wanted to promote their product, they're more than free to. I'm not saying that's wrong. I'm just saying trying to bite a competitor, according to Mike Smith. And it really, if you go through his feed, this is just a personal observation. He seemed to have something against the Norman office. I'm not sure what, because I haven't seen anything publicly, but he seemed to go on about unprovoked attacks against AccuWeather, which there's a few different incidents, but I don't. It just seems like he's angry, or it's something personal to him. That's just personal opinion. I don't understand why you would even think about wanting to promote your brand while trashing the Weather Service. I mean, it's wrong to me. It's just wrong. I'll throw it back to Jeff because I know he was trying to say something, but
no, it's just the thing that I worry about is he wants to trash the Weather Service, but anybody that trashes him, he's all defensive. Well, duh. If you're going to try, if you can shell it out, you better learn how to take it. And I don't think he can, as evidenced by several times that he can give it out, but I don't think he can take it. And if you can't do that, then you better be quiet, because, I mean, who's to say? I didn't see anybody else going crazy, going, oh well, we did better than the Weather Service. Only AccuWeather. I didn't see anybody else do that. I didn't see the Weather Channel saying, well, we forecasted before the Weather Service. I didn't see Weather Nation, the Weather Nation TV. I didn't see them saying, well, we did better than the Weather Service. It seems like AccuWeather is wanting to be aggressive, and they'll find any way to throw, as John said, cheap shots at anybody and any competitor, no matter if it's the Weather Channel, Weather Nation, the Weather Service, local TV people, etc., etc., etc. Especially local TV people that don't use their stuff.
Yeah. Well, for a long time, AccuWeather, had very little weather credibility outside of the Northeast. To be fair, I think that's changed in the last couple of years. But for a long time, AccuWeather's been around a long time. They weren't highly regarded, really, outside of the Northeast. I mean, not with some of the other weather vendors companies, and they're obviously working very hard to change that, and their approach is fairly aggressive. I've got one idea, and I've wondered about this for years, and the machinery is so hard in place, this will never change. But to me, I think when the concept of the watch, the tornado watch, severe thunderstorm watch, was invented, decades ago, it was done so when the understanding of severe weather was a little simpler than it is nowadays. And really, I think it's too bad that we have to separate the two. To me, it would make more sense if we just had a severe thunderstorm watch. That's all it was called. And then each thunderstorm watch would have some kind of a way to prioritize high risk of tornadoes in this watch area today, or high risk of hail and tornadoes, or the storms are expected to be, mostly high wind damage and hail with a smaller risk of tornadoes, that sort of thing. To me, to draw this 100% distinction between a tornado watch and a severe thunderstorm watch leads the public, I think, to be misled by the idea that, well, it's only a severe thunderstorm watch, that's no big deal because there won't be tornadoes today. But it's probably too late to change that. But I've always thought that'd be a good idea. I think sometimes we have too many, Weather Service I think sometimes has too many different types of headlines, too many different types of watches and warnings, and I think those could be simplified. It would probably be a little bit easier on the public. But that's just my opinion.
It all comes back in the end to trying to communicate these weather hazards to the public in an easier and simpler fashion without going so easy. I mean, I know I've ranted about this on probably half of the episodes, but maybe you can give your views on the winter weather advisory, because
here we go.
From what we've seen in this area, from what we've seen in our areas, we have winter weather advisories for blowing snow, and then we have winter advisories for minor accumulations of snow. And when people, I know at least around in my area, I'm not sure if that's the same in yours, but when people hear winter weather advisory, they're going to ask, how much snow are we getting? They're not going to, because most of the time they're not going to read the text. I mean, they'll read the headline, and they'll see when it begins and ends and maybe some extra information on there, but they won't read that entire headline, and they won't know that it's for blowing snow or snow and blowing snow. I know before they merged all of those products, there were like 10 of them.
Or more.
There were way more than 10. Yeah.
It's hard to, because I see both sides. I see why we don't want to have that many products, but then again, if we make it too simple, people aren't going to know what's exactly happening. And then severe thunderstorm watches and tornado watches, we're trying our best to, and social science is helping with this. I know on Weather Brains they've discussed it all the time, but just trying to communicate the warnings better, and I know they're trying to work on it. Impact-based warnings, I think, was kind of a step in that direction. Hard to say whether that's actually working, because going off of, again, on a side note here, impact-based warnings I like the source and the hazards. The impact part of it seems to be kind of default in a way. I mean, because if you go through, if you read, if you're like us during severe weather coverage, we read severe weather text, and the impact is the same every time. And it's hard to say whether that impact actually happens. I mean, same with the tornado warning that was down in Oklahoma. They had a particularly dangerous situation added on to that, and therefore the impact text was like, you are in a life-threatening situation, complete destruction is possible, and just really huge wording. And it's kind of gone off, and I'm thinking of another discussion. I'm not trying to go too off because I'm trying to keep it on the current discussion, but tornado emergencies, it's hard to say what those are because David Payne was on replacing the great legend Gary England down there in Oklahoma, and he called it a tornado emergency for more. It was not an issued tornado emergency, and I had mixed views on that. For one, I could see why he would say that because the NWS wasn't doing anything and he saw the tornado on the ground. But on the other hand, it's hard to say whether that was right of him to do that, since the National Weather Service is kind of, but then again, it's a free country, he can do what he wants. But and then it brings up the debate whether the tornado emergency, because personally I think it should be for any confirmed large and extremely dangerous tornado that you see is large and extremely dangerous. I don't think population should really have an impact on that, because you go through, it's like small town neighborhoods. I mean, tornado warning, we get those here all the time. Do people take action? I mean, if you asked a bunch of people in our community, and you asked, what do you do when a tornado warning is issued? What are they going to do? They're going to go look outside, because you get these radar indicated tornado warnings, and if you lose the confidence in people, then they lose confidence and they will just say, oh, it's just another warning. I mean, it goes back to that false alarm ratio. It all kind of comes back around. And if the tornado emergency, if they know a large and extremely dangerous tornado is on the ground and they know that's what a tornado emergency means, then they'll do that because they've seen it for bigger areas that have had tornado emergencies. But if there's this large and extremely dangerous tornado just going through rural areas, yes, there are still homes there, but you don't issue the tornado emergency because of population. I don't know. It strings back around. I'll throw it over to Jeff on what he thinks about that.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a vicious cycle at this point. You can't. You can do this, and I mean, I happen to look at both when KWTV was David Payne screaming, which, if anybody's ever seen David Payne when he's been in Oklahoma City, either at KFOR or at KWTV, he screams a lot. And then there's Mike Morgan, who seemingly loves to get excitable, and it was almost the antithesis. Mike Morgan is all calm. David Payne's freaking out. And it brings up a point that happened the day before, on Tuesday, when John and I were doing our test. There was this thing going on Twitter about, well, there's all these different stations that have different things of describing the severe weather that was going to be on Wednesday. They had moderate, they used the enhanced from the SPC as moderate, and then they had them in different places. I saw 4 different images from the stations in Oklahoma City giving me 4 different forecasts. And it brings up that point, and we probably go into this when we go actually into the interview of John, whenever we're going to seemingly get to it. But and that's another problem. I saw this in Oklahoma City. I saw that with the snowstorm in New York City that never happened. That there was going to be all this snow in New York, and I saw like 5 or 6 different forecasts, and it brings up the point that if the Weather Service is doing a forecast, and that Mike Smith says that they're not doing it right. Well, then every TV person in Oklahoma City or anywhere else, and John included if he's going to get found out, because somehow they're probably going to go after John somehow if he messed up a forecast. Oh, it snowed 2 inches in Fargo when he only predicted a trace. Oh no, he's going to get it now. But I mean, you can only go now I'm trying to think of what I'm trying to say, but it's the TV, they're just trying to get ratings, to get people, and in hindsight with severe weather, with David Payne screaming and Mike Morgan not screaming, they're a ratings-driven thing. And yes, the warning was not issued. Yes, they should warn people, because it's obvious there's something there, but...
Jeff, if I can interject here, I know in some markets ratings is a thing, but
Oklahoma City is...
I know with a lot of veteran meteorologists, probably like John himself, I'm not sure if he cares about ratings. He might have a collection of data that has ratings galore over it, making sure he stays ahead of
They're like number 3 in Winnipeg.
Yeah, he has to make sure he's staying ahead of everyone else, but it may not be that way. I mean, some people care about ratings. Some people's jobs depend on ratings. I mean, I don't know. John can probably provide some input on that.
I don't know. I've been when I was in Iowa, I worked at WITV back when it was still in Ames, and that was that station was a distant number 3, and that was just my shoe in the door in the business, my foot in the door. Ever since I've been in Fargo and Grand Forks since 1985, WDAY and WDAZ has been the number 1 station. So we've I won't say dominated, because the other station's been competitive and is today, but we've always been number 1. So I don't really have to think about ratings when I'm on the air. I'm just doing my job. But there's a real simple way and a real gracious way of doing this. If you've got a tornado on the ground and you've got chopper video of a tornado on the ground, you tell people there's a tornado on the ground, you tell them where it is, and you tell where it's going based on the information that you have. You don't have to give it a name that confuses it with what the Weather Service is trying to do, because that just confuses the message. I have many times up here where the local Weather Service will issue a winter storm watch or a blizzard watch or something like that, or some other type of headline, and I happen to have reasons to disagree with that forecast. I go on the air and say, here's why it's probably not going to snow, but I'm not going to ignore the fact that there's a winter storm watch and a blizzard watch. You use the government information, the headlines for what they are, and then you give people your forecast, and you don't have to badmouth the Weather Service when you do that. You say, we've got a winter storm watch, here's why I think it's not going to snow. That doesn't step on anybody's toes, and that's the right way of doing it.
Yeah, and that doesn't piss people off. That's the smartest way of doing it, because there's several times when a winter storm watch will get upgraded to winter weather advisory. It is an upgrade, although most people don't think so. And so a winter storm watch, most people think, oh, it's going to snow a lot, and then you say, well, it's only going to snow like 2 inches. Well, that could be winter weather advisory criteria, barely. So then it brings up a point, and I'm going to try to get off of this sooner or later. But it brings up the point when you have the winter weather advisory that we went off on. An advisory is an upgrade. Okay, why isn't there a thunderstorm advisory? Is that an upgrade to a watch? Severe thunderstorm watch? Where's the severe thunderstorm advisory? There isn't one. Should there be? No. But hindsight is 2020. I think there should be thunderstorm advisories that are now put under the special weather statements for storms that could become severe. They're not listed. They're like under a special weather statement where you put up on the thing, special weather statement, and then you say thunderstorm advisory for this, whenever. This storm is producing hail like penny size, which is not severe, or winds of 40 or 50, which are not severe. But it gets people informed that something is getting strong, but it's not severe. But should there be something like that? Maybe that's not a thing. But winter weather advisory, it's like bring it up to the winter side. A winter weather advisory, they say, is an upgrade, and I'm thinking, Well, if it was a severe thunderstorm thing, is there a severe thunderstorm advisory? No. Is there a tornado advisory? No. Would there be? No. So why is there a winter weather advisory? Because it's not as good as a winter storm warning. So I mean, you can have it one way or the other. It's something that Henry and I just drive ourselves completely nuts over. Thank God winter is over. We think, crossing our fingers, because I'm getting.
Well, hold on. Don't be jinxing this, because I had snow in May a couple years ago. So I mean, we're not out of the clearing just.
John can have snow until Memorial Day, the rate he's going.
Well, I think it's finally stopped snowing. I'm looking at my tower cam. Looks like it has, but just since this show began, the ground has turned decidedly white outside my building here. So we just had a snow shower. So it's back to winter.
Gotta love North Dakota.
Yeah, and then he can just cross the river and he'll be in Minnesota and it's white there too.
It almost might not be. This little snow shower was moving into really dry air. We had, before it began snowing, we had a temperature in Fargo of 36 before the snow shower hit, and the dew point was 9. And so the radar echoes had gotten about 50, 60 miles east of here before we actually saw a flake. So it was really, there was a lot of saturating that had to go on. This is actually a pretty healthy snow shower, but it's only given us probably, I don't know, I can't tell from the webcam, 2/3 of an inch of accumulation. So a lot of that went into saturating the atmosphere. Kind of an interest. So I don't know how far east this snow is going to go. Not very far. Maybe across the river, but not much further.
Yeah, I mean, here it's just, it was sunny today. Well, mostly sunny. The sun's already set, so. But
I told my one of my bosses, because one of my bosses is a biker, like bike rider, not like a Harley Davidson rider, but it was 30. I came into work and it was warm outside. I had my coat on and I thought it was just heavenly. And then I told her, go biking because it's nice out. I checked the temperature; it was 36. So my standards for warm have. That kind of shows how the warmth is here in Iowa. 36 is warm, but
I know today they were like saying, a couple of TV people said that this is probably going to be the last night it's going to drop below 20. And I'm thinking, yeah, we still have April. There's been several cases, I could bring this back up, that this was many years ago when I was still living in Springville. We had a really warm early spring. My tulips came up. Then April hit, the temperature plunged to 15, and my tulips all died. So yeah, we still have April, and we could still have snow. But anyway, so we're done with the current weather and the weather story and the tornadoes and the ranting and the screaming and yelling part at this point, and that took us over an hour, or almost an hour. And we haven't gotten to the good part yet. So anyway, now we're actually going to interview John at this point. He's been wondering what he got himself into, but this is what happens when we have interesting weather that takes place in the past week, so who knows what will happen next week. But anyway, so John, on the other hand, as many of you probably have figured out by now, he is the chief meteorologist at WDAY and WDAZ. Those are two different stations, but he does the weather for both at 6 and at 10, or 5, 6, and 10, or whatever time. He does it in the evening. So, and there's an interesting side note about that he's been there for 30 years, but he was not born in the Midwest. He was born in Louisiana. In Baton Rouge, that would be correct, right?
That's correct.
And then he decided Louisiana wasn't good enough for him. So he went to Birmingham, Alabama, where the weather is a little different. And he's like, yeah, but I don't like it here. So he went to Madison, Wisconsin, or somewhere near there. And he's like, Wisconsin isn't good enough. So he went to Iowa, to West Union. And then that's where he then went to school at Iowa State, where he went to school at Iowa State, graduated, went to WOI, which was at campus. It was on campus, on the northwest side of campus at the time. And then he was there a year before he was like, yes, this station is not very good. Let me go to Fargo, where the weather is much different than where he was born, where he grew up in Alabama, and a little different from Wisconsin to Iowa. So we'd ask John, why the heck are you in Fargo, in that part of the country? Have you finally acclimated to this weather by now?
Oh, absolutely. My sojourn through the South and into the Midwest, though, was mostly a product of my father being in graduate school. I was born while he was getting his master's degree in mathematics at LSU, and then he became a math teacher south of Birmingham. We stayed there for about 10 years. And then he had been pursuing some advanced courses, and finally, when he was in his late 30s, he decided to get his PhD. So that's why the move to Madison. My dad got his PhD from UW-Madison in the 70s, so we moved up to Wisconsin. And then after he finished work on his degree, we settled in Iowa. That's sort of how that story went about. My story is pretty simple. Once I grabbed my own reins, I went off to college at Iowa State, majored in meteorology. Actually, I started in engineering. I didn't go to college to be a meteorologist, although it had always been a hobby. I took engineering, but that lasted one term, and maybe you guys can sympathize with this. I figured out when I was in college what it is that engineers do. I had envisioned, building a bridge or designing a microwave oven or something, but it turns out most engineers work on the minutia, tiny details of a microwave oven or whatever they're working on. You work on small parts of the big, and meteorology was cool because it's a big picture. I mean, either it rains or it doesn't, and the process is so synoptic scale, so big that kind of impressed me, and so I became a meteorology major. First job at WOI. Didn't leave it because I didn't like the station. I left it because I got a job that offered more real money. Because I was just
go where the money is.
I was a part-time guy there doing the weekend weather, being paid so much an hour, and the weekend position at that time, when the station was on campus, was really designed for a graduate student.
Yeah.
And so I came up here because I got hired, and it's been a good company to work for. We're locally owned, and Fargo has become kind of a popular, kitschy place. It's a good place to live.
I'll tell you one thing: locally owned is kind of hard to come by anymore. So you're pretty lucky up there.
Yeah, it's rare. I mean, not only is it locally owned, but I know the owner. I'm friends with the owner. I regularly exchange texts with the owner. Yeah, it's a good thing. It's a good thing.
That's a good relationship.
If I have a real serious problem, we can go talk about it.
No, yeah. I think John is the owner.
No, I don't think so.
You get these big corporations like Sinclair and I don't know what the other ones are, but
Sinclair, Gannett, Nexstar, Gray. I know Gray is John's competitor now. John will talk about his
a lot of competition up in that market, but John doesn't have to worry because he's dominating in the.
No, that's your word, not mine.
Yeah. The interesting thing about this though is that that when I was looking it up, that John actually has the weather. And there's old video of John. I should bring it up, but I'm not going to. Of that they were seeing back in the analog days, that because of Channel 6 being in Fargo and Channel 8, which is WDAZ in Grand Forks, the reason for that was because of the analog of Channel 6, there was a Channel 6 in Winnipeg. So Channel 8 was put in Grand Forks, so people up in that part of the market can actually see the programming. But Channel 8 could be seen in Manitoba and in Winnipeg. So in that case, and it still may be the case even now, because you mentioned this in our test, that there are people in Manitoba that can see you doing the weather on Channel 8, your semi-satellite. So you really don't cater to them. You just say, here's the temperature here, and that's about all you can do for the people up at like Winnipeg or anywhere north of the border.
Right. Well, the folks in Winnipeg, we the mechanics of it, the hard facts of it are, television still becomes an industry that is based on ratings. I mean, the only reason why these places make money is because of ad revenue, and ad revenue, whether we like it or not, is based on those ratings books. And Winnipeg doesn't count in the ratings books. Our WDAZ satellite does generate quite a bit of ad revenue for its Winnipeg viewers, but it's not based on ratings. I actually don't know how it's done. But so no, we don't spend a lot of time talking about. I mean, I'm not going to go on the air with Environment Canada, tornado advice for the city of Winnipeg. I can't keep up with.
Now that would be awesome. I'd want to see that.
That would be kind.
This would be interesting. I want to see that. I want to see John actually have to do a tornado warning for whichever county it is that borders Manitoba, either in North Dakota or in Minnesota, and the tornado warning polygon ends right at the Canadian border, and then they start issuing warnings by Environment Canada, and they're like 10 times larger, because we had. So there's like, oh, there's this little polygon. It's like really tiny, and then Environment Canada issues something that's half the size of North Dakota or something. It's like, okay, that's a little too crazy, but yeah. That would be awesome. I'd want to see American and then Canadian doing the same thing. You'd see, it would look weird. That would be awesome.
I will note there was a severe thunderstorm a while back in or a severe thunderstorm warning a while back. I'm not in North Dakota that covered, I think, 1/3 to a half of the state from a squalling, I think it was.
I bet I know exactly what that was. I can shed a little light on that. We live in the country up here where, I mean, you get these in Iowa sometimes too, but this is really big time. We get a lot of our storm events fall into two categories. One is we get an awful lot of pulse storms because we're really on the northern fringe of Tornado Alley. We do certainly get severe thunderstorms. The 1957 tornado that hit Fargo was one of the two tornadoes that formed the basis of Ted Fujita's work in the Fujita scale, because it was so well photographed. But so we do get them up here, but an awful lot of our tornadoes up here are pulse type. Awful lot of our storms are pulse types. We just don't get the environment, the classic environment, as frequently. So we have a lot of storms that are issued, a lot of storm warnings that are issued by the Weather Service office, and the warning lasts far longer than the storm is actually severe because they're pulsing. The other thing that we're up in the area where we get a lot of derecho storms. And that particular one almost certainly was a derecho, where it just becomes easier rather than focusing on each little focal point of high wind gusts. It's much easier just to put a huge warning out on this whole line and propagate it east for an hour and say, there's your severe thunderstorm warning. There's going to be a lot of damaging winds in that area. That makes sense to me because it's far easier to keep up with on the air, and it makes a lot more sense to the people that are watching.
I can imagine NOAA Weather Radio probably had a fun time reading 30 counties, I think it was, off of a single warning.
It wasn't that many.
It wasn't that many. Oh, there's yeah, that was a while ago.
What happened to this man? This is pretty funny. I watched this and it was hilarious. And this is WDAZ. This is Grand Forks the satellite. And the funny thing about this was, this came from a YouTuber in Winnipeg. So somebody in Winnipeg likes WDAZ for some reason. So
yeah, I get emails and texts from Winnipeggers routinely.
So yeah, I mean, I had to show this because this was pretty funny, but
I still have hair.
Yeah, not as much back then.
Not as much. A lot of people my age don't, though.
But now I've lost track of what I wanted to say. Oh, brother, I'm bad at what so when we'll get to the flood, the '97 one, and then there's been several others. But when you do the forecast, do you, given the fact that you're so close to the Canadian border and there's a lot of storms that come from the northwest, especially Alberta Clippers, do you have the tendency to look not just at the Weather Service stuff out of Fargo Grand Forks and all the models, but do you tend to also look at stuff Environment Canada is doing for like areas in southeastern Saskatchewan and southern Manitoba?
At the Environment Canada forecast, you know, I don't ignore it, but it's not something that I look at every day. I certainly look at, I've used the Canadian model for years. I think it has some advantages, although it doesn't have the resolution. I think it has some advantages, and you know, it's been engineered to work for the type of weather that Canadians see. I think sometimes it has some advantages over some Clipper systems, and it's always worth a look. And you know, Environment Canada does things a little bit differently. They'll put a probability of snow. They'll say a 30% chance of flurries, which is something that the NWS doesn't do. So that they do things quite a bit differently up there. Also, the Winnipeg office forecasts for, like, you know, an area half the size of the United States. The Winnipeg office forecasts for much of the Northwest Territories and Churchill and northern. I mean, it's a huge forecast responsibility. So obviously they do things very differently. I think Environment Canada is mostly model-based forecast. There's not a lot of deviation from.
So it'd be like, so just looking at, say, the Canadian model, the GEM model, is pretty much you'd get what the Environment Canada forecast is going to be.
Yeah, you do.
So when you look at models, you probably would look at, let's say, like the GFS or the NAM or whatnot. But you're probably one, like you said, that uses the Canadian more often than pretty much anybody else, given the fact you're so close to it, to Canada.
I don't look at it daily. You know, like, my money's going to be on the euro most of the time for anything in the medium range period, except when it's really screwing up. And I don't like to be tied to just one model, certainly.
And is that always been the case, that you don't want to tie down to any model, anywhere, for any type of weather? Severe weather, winter weather, normal sunny weather?
Right. I mean, you got to realize I started out when the main medium range, short range model was the LFM. I worked with the LFM for years, the linear fine mesh, which is, you know, was generated before you guys were born, I think.
Oh, great.
That predated the NGM. The nested grid was really new technology when that thing first came out. Back in those days, you didn't have a lot of choice, and you didn't have computers to access it either way. You had to deal with paper maps. So.
Yeah, you got them on the faxes, and they only went out maybe 2-3 days or something like that, or maybe
3 days. No. How about 36 hours?
Or 36 hours, you know.
Back, 36. Some of them, the NGM went to 48, and then we got. I remember when we started getting the NGM to 60, it was like, whoa, that's like really long range.
And now you have climate models that go. You have climate models that go out like 8 months now, and you have the GFS going out 16 days, and the Euro goes out, I think, 10 and whatnot. And so you think that in the future you could see the Euro going out to, say, 20, the GFS out to like 30, and you could have climate models out 2-3 years.
Well, you know, I don't think that's a bad idea. In the tradition, say the last 20 years of weather forecasting, the weather forecasting process, we in the media and the National Weather Service, we do a pretty good job of forecasting the weather for the next few days. And CPC does you could argue how good of a job they do, but there's this general feel for forecasting for the summer, you know, the 30-day and the 90-day period. And yet there's this absence that I've been focusing a lot of time on the last few years. We don't forecast the 10 to 20-day period really very seriously at all. And yet, there's a lot of gain to be gotten, because I think sometimes in the 10 to 20-day period, we could do a better job in our industry of forecasting things like Arctic air outbreaks or excessively wet weather patterns. You can't obviously do daily forecasts at that
Yeah.
range, but I think we probably are starting to get to the point where we can legitimately say that it's starting to look like mid-April, for example, if the GFS's idea of a West Coast trough comes true, the Great Plains after Easter could be looking at some really hot, dry weather, say April 10th through 15th. I think if yesterday's model comes to fruition, that's conceivable. We don't forecast that, but that would be good information to a lot of people if it were going to be 86 degrees in central Iowa and 80 degrees in Fargo in a few days after Easter. That'd be a good forecast.
So it'd also be used for, say, if there had been a lot of snow in North Dakota and northwestern Minnesota, which there hasn't been. It'd be good to know if a hot dome is coming and all the snow melts like right away, and here's the Red River deciding to flood everywhere. If you had a lot of snow, you could prepare the people way in advance that it's going to come. I mean, there's the flood things that tell you, oh, there's a lot of snow on the ground. It's going to flood. There's going to be flood risks because they have them. But if you know when it's possibly going to start, you can start setting up the sandbags, getting the dikes prepared, all this stuff. So then you, instead of like getting it like 2 days in advance or 3 or 4 or 5, and then you're hustling, and then stuff doesn't get done quite how you want it. Stuff breaks, the river's flying everywhere, and then houses get destroyed and float down the river, or in your case, up the river.
It's still down.
Well, down, up, it goes the other way.
It's north, but it's still
south.
downhill.
So speaking of that, you were there during the flood in '97, which was the first one. I think there was multiples, but '97 is well remembered for the flood of the Red River of the North. So you can talk about how that came about, if there was a lot of snow, and how it was forecasted, and compare that to, say, could it be done better now, and compare it to the flood that occurred in Iowa in 2008, because there are some comparisons.
There are some interesting Well, the Red River Valley has always been flood prone, just because it's such flat terrain. There's a myth that the Red River floods because it flows north, and the conception, which is actually wrong, but it's a myth that's held by a lot of people up here, is that because it flows north, it melts in the southern part of the Red River Valley and starts flowing while the northern part is still frozen, and that causes a backup. But that's not why it floods at all. That's actually a misconception. It floods because the slope of the Red River is so minimal. This place is so flat. It drops at a rate of 6 inches per mile in the southern valley, and by the time it gets north of Grand Forks toward the Canadian border, its slope drops to 2 inches per mile. That's the slope on the river. So it's barely flowing anyway, and it's just so flat. And not only that, the river itself, the river valley, is very new. 8,000 years ago, of course, this was still Lake Agassiz, the glacial meltwater lake, and there's no real good channel at all. And so when we get all this water from a heavy snow, and unlike Iowa, I lived in Iowa for a long time, and it's pretty rare in Iowa to have snow cover, that lasts all winter, from November through to March. You'll get that once in a while, but most of the time you'll get a few 50-degree days in January and it melts and you start over. Up here, we didn't have that this winter, but that's unusual. Most of the time up here, what starts accumulating around Thanksgiving is usually doesn't melt until sometime at the end of March or April. Two springs ago, we did not see the ground until April 27th. We had snow cover from November right up until the very end of April. And so you've got all that winter snowpack to melt all at once. And we get some pretty devastating floods. What happened was there had been a routine flooding here in the 1880s and 1890s, and then the climate just dried up a little bit. And so the severe flooding became a little less routine. But still, every 8-10 years, there'd be a fairly serious flood. A number of things have happened to change this. One is that the slope, of course, hasn't changed, but farmers are doing a much better job of getting water off their land so they can plant. So there's been a little bit of a bottleneck into the river. Another thing is that there's been a lot of ditching that's ongoing over the last few decades, so that the water simply gets into the bottom of the basin a lot more quickly. And so it does, the floods, the accumulation of water, the crest, happens a little more quickly than it did a few decades ago. And there's another interesting thing, too. Starting in about, well, there's a region from eastern North Dakota through southern Minnesota, north central and northeast Iowa, which since approximately, remember that really rainy summer in 1993 in Iowa, where it just rained constantly? Since really that summer, because that was a wet one up here too, this region from eastern North Dakota down through northeast Iowa has seen an increase in rainfall, in annual rainfall. And right here in the Red River Valley, it's really pronounced. I mean, if you take the entire period of record at Fargo, 1881 to 1992, and then you take 1993 to now, average annual rainfall starting in that year 1993 jumped 20%. So we went from average annual rainfall of about 19.5 inches to now it's up to about 24 inches a year. So, and you know the way the nature of precipitation, when you increase the average, that means you're increasing the number of heavy events, the frequency of heavy events. And rain doesn't happen so many inches per week. Rain happens where you get a cluster of wet weather for a period, and then it backs off. So weather is usually either drier or wetter than average, not average. So when it's wetter than average, and you get one of those wetter than average periods, it's a lot wetter. So since 1993, flooding has become much more routine. And the first one was in 1997. Fargo had 117 inches of snow that winter, none of which melted until April. And when it melted all at once. And it rained also. We had a big ice storm at the very end of it. And Fargo was saved, frankly, by cold weather. The meltwaters actually froze. Grand Forks didn't get so lucky. Timing was different, and that was the year that Grand Forks flooded. And the Weather Service, not the Weather Service, that would have been the River Prediction Center, struggled a little bit with that forecast, mostly because it was higher than any river flood had happened up here before. And so they were kind of dealing with new territory. And they learned from that experience. Part of the problem was in 1997 is the River Forecast Center stuck to the model even when the empirical evidence was that the river was in Grand Forks was going higher than the model was suggesting. And they kept assuring Grand Forks, nope, our model's saying it's going to go to 49.5 feet. And it ended up cresting at 54. And the city was flooded. And they learned from that. And they've been much better since then. The argument, though, that the comparison between that and the Cedar Rapids flood in 2008, which is kind of interesting, is that sometimes there is a rogue weather event that is leaps and bounds worse than any other event in the region. And in Grand Forks, the 1997 flood was that event, where it was a significant percentage higher than the river had ever gone. The Fargo flood in 2009, in which Fargo was able to dike out the waters by like an inch. It was really nip and tuck, and that was a bad flood. Was quite a bit higher than any other known flood. And that's what happened in Cedar Rapids in 2008, is that you had this kind of rogue event where it's 10-20% worse than any known flood in the area. And it's sort of like a Hurricane Sandy. Sometimes you're just going to get those events that challenge the limitations of your knowledge. And those are really hard to forecast when you're going beyond anything you've ever seen before.
Yeah, because I know with the flood that happened in 2008 in Cedar Rapids, the highest it had ever been was 20 feet. It crested at 31.
Yeah.
And I think they said that, if I remember, they were saying it was going to crest at like 23 or 4 or something like that. What ended up happening is, and I remember this, since I was living in Springville at the time, is that the day before the crest, which was on a Friday, that Thursday, it just dumped rain all over the place. It just poured. and it all of a sudden, everything, it was pretty much like a flash flood. Everything just drained back into the river, and the river just jumped all of a sudden, and they didn't know what to do. And it didn't help when the railroad bridge had collapsed, which was very close to the river gauge, which was underwater. So the river gauge, they couldn't even get to it. They had to get on a boat to go to it. And you wouldn't have wanted to, because the river had gone from like, it pretty much tripled in size. So the river, instead of being maybe about 300 feet wide, maybe, I don't know it quite offhand, 300 feet wide, now it's like maybe almost a mile wide. So from one end of the flood to the other. And it's flowing like crazy. It's going, and I remember seeing this vividly when they were doing a boat tour of downtown Cedar Rapids. It looked like Venice to me, Venice, Italy, where it's like these canals, and you just take a boat and go through them. It was so weird. I'd never seen that before. The only other time I'd seen it was where Grand Forks. I keep misdoing it, Fargo and Grand Forks, but Grand Forks in '97. Boats going through town, and you could see the town. But unlike in the Cedar Rapids flood, Grand Forks then had a fire that then destroyed downtown because they couldn't get to it because there was flooding. So then this building starts on fire, and it all burns down, and you see a fire. I remember this. This building in downtown Grand Forks is on fire, and the fire department can't get to it because there's like 5 or 6 feet of water in the street, so they had to let it burn.
Yeah.
It was so hilarious.
Water was over 10 feet deep in downtown Grand Forks, and it was an electrical fire. In the evacuation, not everybody got their electricity turned off.
Yeah, I mean, that at least in Cedar Rapids, there's where there was a difference. There was no fire. There was some electrical problems after when they were having problems after the water had all gone down and they drained all the water out. That's when the electrical problems started in Cedar Rapids, but that was after the fact. So yeah, the same thing probably would have happened, but I think they were more prepared in Cedar Rapids for turning everything off and getting everything shut off. Unlike,
you want to see what the Red River floods are like? Google a Landsat image of the Red River Valley from the spring of 2009 or 2010 or 2011, because there were three floods in a row there when the weather was so wet. 2009 was the worst, and you can see the floodwaters on the Landsat imagery. And south of Fargo, the river actually expands into when it's held back by basically by trying to get the water in between Fargo, North Dakota, and Moorhead, Minnesota, in between the dikes through the middle of town. It's squeezed, and south of town, it turns into a huge lake when we have a bad flood. It's about anywhere, depending on the spot, it's anywhere from 10 to 20 miles wide. I know in spring of 2009, there was something like 70 sections. That's 70 sections. That's 70 square miles of water, of fields that were flooded directly south of Fargo, and you had to channel that through in between the two cities. When I think about it now, it's really pretty amazing that Fargo wasn't flooded in 2009. That was just a lot of water.
Now,
I think they determined the flood fight cost something like $50 million.
For which one? 09, 10, 97?
09. Yeah, that was the one that really was tough.
Is that really hard to, it's coming, so is it really hard to forecast? Is it a lot better than it was for, say, like in 97 when we're stuck on this is 49? Is it a lot easier now? Have they gotten better with the Red River and any of the rivers that do flow into the Red River?
Yeah, they are better. They still have some issues. The River Forecast Center does. Their model, for whatever reason, doesn't well, the Red River Valley area is so flat. The model does not do well with river forecasting immediately after a rain, and it's because it's like plywood here. I mean, there's just no slope, and so really until the water goes from the fields to the ditches and into the tributaries, which takes 2 or 3 days, they're not very good at reacting to flood conditions after a rain. What happened in Cedar Rapids, that kind of flash flood, is is not very common here because the slope of the land is so much flatter than it is in Iowa, if you can believe that. And the other problem that the River Forecast Center models have with Red River is that for whatever reason, they're not very good after the crest. It seems like the River Forecast Center model will hang on to higher stages after the crest when the river actually tends to drop away a lot more quickly. But, it's a known commodity, so we're usually able to deal with it.
So, besides flooding, and what ends up that seems to be like the big thing in that part of the country in North Dakota, Minnesota, the flooding, or is there like snow storms or blizzards, or is more the blizzard type events more toward Bismarck and then down into South Dakota than it would be, say, Fargo or Grand Forks?
No, the Red River Valley, Fargo, Grand Forks has more blizzards than any other place in the United States except for the north slope of Alaska. This is the blizzard capital of the lower 48.
Oh, goody. I'm sure you're excited about that.
Oh, I love blizzards. I mean, it's one of the reasons why I've been here. They're fun to forecast. A couple of things. One, it's the flat terrain. Surface roughness goes down to nearly nil. There aren't very many trees. And the other thing that you don't realize, if you look again at a Landsat image of the Red River Valley, there is an edge to it. And that edge, of course, is the beach of old ancient glacial Lake Agassiz. And it's shaped like a V. So in the northern part of the Red River Valley, up in the Canadian border, it's much wider. And then south of Fargo, it comes down to a point. So that V shape channels the wind. So when we have a wind that's almost due north, a classic blizzard wind, the winds will be much higher in the Red River Valley because of that channeling. And so we get 35-mile-an-hour winds fairly easily here in the wintertime. Some winters we may have, in our bad winters, we may have 6, 8, 9 blizzards during the course of a winter. I mean, full-bore, zero-visibility blizzards. This past winter wasn't so bad because we didn't have enough snow. But wind is a constant here, almost, and we do have the right setup for blizzards a lot. So that's probably what we're known for more than flooding. We've been wet since 1993. I was up here in the late 80s when you couldn't buy a flood. I mean, it was drought, and we still were getting blizzards then. So this is blizzard country more than anything.
So blizzard warnings are like winter weather advisories for most everybody else. They're a dime a dozen.
They are a dime a dozen. We get kind of used to them.
So do you go when there's a blizzard warning? It's like, does the public, are they like, oh, another one of these? Are they kind of like they're used to it since it is blizzard country?
Well, you'd think so, but everywhere the public has certain. Some of the public just have limited intelligence about their own weather. One thing that happens is this: is that a lot of our blizzards up here are not associated with heavy snowfall. A lot of the times when we get blizzard conditions, it's really just a pressure gradient, and maybe accompanied by an inch of snow. But it's old snow that's on the ground that's being blown around.
Yeah.
Well, those situations within the city limits of Fargo, where there are a lot of buildings, visibility's fine. So we may be in a blizzard warning for a day or 2 days here, and you can get around town just fine. I mean, the wind is screaming, and it seems like it's kind of foggy with all that pulverized snow in the air. But it's not zero visibility. But you get to the edge of the town, and you can't see a thing. And sometimes people, this has grown to a fairly large city, and people, I think, don't realize how much different it is out in the rural areas when we're having one of those ground blizzards.
What's the threshold for blizzard warnings? I mean, what's the wind speed that you have to get to? I know it probably is different out there.
35. And it works amazingly well. If you have snow that's got a little bit of a crust on it and no new snow falling, once the winds hit about 35 miles an hour, they just loosen up that old snowpack, unless it's just ice, unless it's just solid ice, and you get severe ground blizzard conditions. When you get snow that's falling, when the winds get up around 25 plus and are gusting up to 35, you can get those whiteout conditions. But that's a little bit different. I mean, the true blizzard, I get a kick sometimes out of watching networks coverage of the Northeast blizzards. because those are different things. That's not like a blizzard is here. A blizzard here is it's being out in one is really freaky scary, and I've done it. I mean, if you haven't been in this situation, you haven't been in a Northern Plains blizzard. And the situation is you're in a car and you're driving down the road and you've got a passenger, and both of you have the doors open, and both of you, the driver and the passenger, are looking down at the ground so you can see where the edge of the road is, and you're trying to drive forward without going into the ditch. You're not even looking at what's ahead of you because you can't see anything beyond, you can't see the end of your car. That's a severe blizzard, and that's a pretty special kind of weather that just doesn't happen in the Northeast, and it's even pretty rare in Iowa.
I know.
Mason City, you'll get it sometimes, and up around Estherville, you'll get those conditions a little bit, but we have them a lot up here because of the flat terrain.
I know here we haven't. Jeff can probably remember this easier because I cannot remember anything really. But this year we haven't really had much of a big snow event. I mean, we've always had those isolated amounts of a foot or more, but really
we had at the end of January and early February, but that wasn't a blizzard.
Yeah, I mean, we had one with a blizzard warning, but that was kind of trigger happy by the Weather Service offices because those didn't even reach criteria, I don't think. And those only were accompanied by, I think, an inch of snow, kind of similar to what you're talking about. But it still lowered the visibilities. But Jeff, when was the last time we had a true blizzard here? That was actually.
If you're talking about a blizzard that's completely like a blizzard, like he talks about, like you have to get out and look out the road, I would probably say the Groundhog Day blizzard in 2011. That one, it dumped a lot of snow. I had, gosh, how much snow? 15 inches, and I had drifts up to 7-8 feet. That was a blizzard. That's what I would call severe here, is if you have snow, it finally hits a building or something, and it starts just going straight up, and you have like a mountain and it's taller than you. That's what I would call severe. If it's blowing that hard and it's blowing so much up, a couple good 5, 6, 7 feet, that's what I would consider a blizzard. Because since I live in town, if it's 5, 6, 7 feet and you're in town, I hate to think what it is out in the country where it could be a whole heck of a lot worse. Because I know from that same storm a couple years ago, there's this street next to me that goes north and south. That road, they had to get those rural road graders that they go through. I think they have them in North Dakota too, and in Minnesota, where they go through on these gravel roads or whatnot to go through these big, huge drifts, because a normal plow wouldn't be able to do that. They had to do this in this street down here, in town, because it had drifted 4 or 5 feet in the street, and they couldn't use a regular plow. They had to go get one of those rural ones to just blast through it because they couldn't use a normal plow. And I call that horribly severe, at least in this area.
In 1997, 96, 97, when we had that 117 inches of snow, I mean, do the math, what is that, about 10 feet? There were drifts in excess of 35 feet. And that particular winter, they had to bring in National Guard equipment to clear the roads a few times. That was really incredible. Just a lot of snow. None of it melted. That was the deepest average depth in March that year in Fargo got up to I think it was 32 or 34 inches, which is an average depth. But that was really compacted. I mean, there were drifts in my yard I was shoveling in my backyard where I've got a little, sidewalk and deck, and I was shoveling. It had to have been at least 9 feet that I was trying to throw snow to. I remember on my street where I live, because I walk to work, in March of 1997, I could be walking down the sidewalk. I could hear cars on the street, but I could not see them over the pile of snow.
It was like
sort of like what they had in Boston, I think, this winter.
kind of like tunnel vision. It's like, here's the sidewalk, and it's just like walls.
It was crazy. Yeah, it was like that.
Yeah, we don't get that.
No, we don't usually. That's kind of like, you know, Marquette, Michigan kind of stuff.
Sort of like, yeah, like lake effect type stuff.
Yeah.
So it'd be similar to that.
Yeah.
So would you consider that to be the worst weather you've ever seen? Not any tornadoes or flooding. It's like really bad, severe blizzards. Would that be considered the worst?
That's probably what they have the most of. We get a lot of really cold weather here that you don't get in Iowa, and because we didn't have much this winter, it wasn't cold at all, really. The coldest it got was 19 below in Fargo. That's nothing. But when we're having a really good, hearty cold air outbreak up here, we don't generate a lot of media attention because there's no cold air drainage in the Red River Valley. It's flat, so we don't get the sexy 40, 50 below, 60 below temperatures that, you know, northeast Minnesota gets. But when we get really cold, and it gets 40 below-ish at its lowest here, we'll have days, though, where the highs are only in the minus 20s. And that hasn't happened here in a couple of years, maybe 3 or 4. But when you get a day where it's in the middle of the afternoon and it's 21, or one day back in 1996 we had a high of 28 below, you get a 10, 12 mile an hour wind with that.
Oh God!
It's really hard to stay warm, and I've got a pretty good warm coat, but that's pretty cold stuff.
That was February '96.
Yeah, that's when the state Iowa record in Elkader was set.
Yep.
Yeah.
I think several records were set during that outbreak.
Yeah. We didn't set a record. It was the coldest temperature in Fargo in the 20th century, but it wasn't a record. I mean, it was a daily record, but it wasn't like a all-time record or anything. It wasn't even close.
Yeah. So we've been on almost 2 hours outside of the time we screwed up and stuff. So is there anything else, Henry, we could discuss before we get to our shout-outs or whatnot?
No, not until we get to
I think I know what Henry's going to shout out. So when we do our shout-outs, John, I didn't warn you. You can shout out anything, person, place, thing, competitors, people who want to throw people under the bus. You can shout out anything, weather-related, not weather-related, Winnipeggers. You can do whatever. So when we get to you, so Henry, I'm sure you have a shout out that you probably want to discuss. And don't take an hour again.
I'm working on getting this up here. Hopefully I can. As you probably know, it is Severe Weather Awareness Week wrapped up today in Iowa. And we did posts every day, pretty much ranging on 5 topics: flash flooding, warning reception, tornadoes, severe thunderstorms, and family preparedness. And a part of that, we got weatherradios.com to sponsor a weather radio giveaway, a part of that Severe Weather Awareness Week. And we are giving away first a Midland WR300 $60 value, graciously donated to us by weatherradios.com. Thanks to them for giving that to us, but we will be drawing that here in just a couple minutes. And next week we will be giving away an Eton Zone Guard, if I remember correctly. Both are great radios with $50 to $60 values. So, and don't make it sound like weather radios are really expensive to get, because while these are high-end weather radios, you can still get affordable radios. I know Midland has a very good selection, along with I think Oregon Scientific too. But anyway, again, just to note, we had a pretty good Severe Weather Awareness Week. Pretty much we wanted to focus on each day, again, just the basic dangers of flash flooding, the tornado drill on Wednesday, which went very successfully.
And then they had the actual thing that people could have looked at later on in Oklahoma and Arkansas.
And then, of course, just the general what to do during severe weather. And we encourage you to just go familiarize yourself with the different meetings. I know flash flooding especially gets kind of confusing because you have aerial flood warning, you have flash flood warning, you have aerial flood watch, flash flood watch, river flood warning, river flood watch, river flood advisory, and then all the, you have, I think, yeah, you have 6, 7, 8, 9, around 10 products.
Simplify that.
Yeah. And of course, you got your flash flood emergency and your PDS flash flood watch. And I was kind of surprised because we were just, side note here, but we were discussing the PDS, use of the PDS in weather statements from the National Weather Service, and they're really expanding this to everything. Except the thing with the warnings, which I know I'm going off on a rant again, which I know you guys love, but confusing the public between normal tornado warning, a PDS warning, and emergency. I mean, I hope they do kind of simplify that in a way because, of course, we know what it means, but we need to communicate that to the public better because particularly dangerous situation, that's a bit vague. Tornado emergency, most people know what that means, and of course you have your normal tornado warning, but again, we just encourage you to familiarize yourself with that. Our winner from the weather radio giveaway, after doing a random selection here, will be going to Brenda Heck. We will be emailing her here shortly and getting the details. I just got off email with those guys, and we should be receiving the radios by Tuesday, so we'll be mailing those out. Also, so, and my shout out here, just to show that off, I'll actually have 2 shout outs here. First, our Severe Weather Awareness Week 2015 page, you get all these great posts. That's a bit wonky. But we have all those great posts. What the heck?
What did you do?
Good question. My computer's going crazy. But yeah, that is my. Okay, I guess screen share must have had something to do with it. But anyway, that I'll be sharing that link out, and it's still funky. But anyway, I'll be sharing that link. And my second shout out that I know Jeff will love will be a link to a news article about my local school. Our head football coach has resigned, Jeff.
Here.
That's just kind of an inside thing, but he's been here for a billion years. But anyway, I'll let you guys do your shout out while I try to fix my computer.
Yeah, right now I'm getting mine together, but okay, wait a minute. Okay, now I got it. I had to let me go screen share this because this will be okay. My shout out is KFOR's coverage from the tornado and more on Wednesday, and here it is. Who can find the tornado? And the tornado is on the ground at this point. There's the wall cloud. Here's the tornado. It's in this area. But there's also one over here. So it's pretty much this entire area. Because if I zoom in, there's lovely Mike Morgan. At this point, he was pointing at one that's over here. But as you can see, there's now a funnel here, so it's here and here. It's all over here. So that's what I'm going to, because this is in 2 parts. Part 1 that I was showing is the part with the tornado in it. And part 2 is all the people, all their storm people showing the damage from it, the radio towers that got knocked down, which was in Moore. Known for most people as the KOMA towers that were struck. Of course, as people in Oklahoma City would know, KOMA does not exist anymore. It's now KOKC 1520. which I had to look. They still refer to it as KOMA because it was that call letters for so many years. But so I have that because I watched that right after, a couple hours after the event, because I was actually watching during that coverage on Wednesday. I was watching KOTV out of Tulsa. So that's my shout out. So John, do you have any person, place, thing to shout out?
Yeah, I do, and residents of Eastern Iowa might remember this. A friend of mine in the business by the name of Dana Turtle, he's a meteorologist in Columbus, Ohio, a couple of weeks ago sent me a Facebook message that I needed to hook up with electronically. I needed to make friends with his competitor, who it turns out, and my friend Dana Turtle didn't know this, he knew that his competitor had once worked in Iowa as a broadcast meteorologist. But what he didn't know is that he was my weather hero when I was like in 10th grade. When we first moved to West Union from Wisconsin, KWWL-TV, the meteorologist there at the time, was Jim Ganal.
Yep.
And anyway, so I've become friends with Jim Ganal, and he's in his 60s now, still working in Columbus, Ohio. He's like the weather god of Central Ohio now. And we formed this neat relationship, and it's really pretty cool. Jim Ganal is still, the youngest person ever to receive the AMS seal of approval back before the GCM came out. He was 17 years old when he got the AMS seal of approval, and he's quite a guy. And so it's neat that I've been able to connect with him after all these years. I was 17 years old myself when I first became a fan of his. So, and I later interned at KWWL when I was in college. So we have a little bit of shared history there.
Yeah. So I know with Jim. Jim has had several health issues over the past couple of years. He's getting better. It's funny. He's been in the business so long. And he's in his 60s, and he's been in the business longer than I think anybody else has, because he started when he was still in high school.
Right. Yeah.
Because I think he was in high school at the time, and he became the weekday meteorologist at Channel 7. He was there until the late 70s, and then he went to Columbus, and he's been there since.
Right.
Which is interesting because there's still several people that remember him.
Yeah, I'm sure they do.
Because it's been, and Channel 7 is still in the same building downtown in Waterloo. It's the only person that is still there today is Ron Steele. He is still there, and he's been there since '74, and he's still there. But everybody else has come and gone and whatnot. But yes, Jim is remembered, and it's JYM. That's how he spells it. But so yeah, he left before I was born. So, but I knew of him because he looked like a kid. It's like, what is this kid doing on television? But I think from what I remember, and I'm sorry I'm going off on this again, but that they hired him. I think it was almost like a ploy because he wanted to do it and they wanted somebody, so they were like, well, this would be interesting. Let's put him on, and it ended up lasting, if I remember, 12 years that he was on until he left. So
I'll tell you something really interesting about Jim Ganal that I learned just from chatting with him, is that he lives in Columbus. Columbus is a little hillier than North Dakota, and probably even hillier than Northeast Iowa. But he has a snowmaking machine in his yard. So for his grandkids now, he's always got snow all winter long for them to toboggan on down the hill in his backyard because he's got his own snow machine.
Oh no!
That's pretty cool.
He's doing his own weather. It's going to snow in my backyard, and it's June 10th. That's completely weird.
That's nice, I think.
I know he still has relatives because he did a report when he was doing his family history thing a couple years ago. At the time, his mother was still living in Dubuque, and he came back for that and whatnot. So I know he still has connections, but besides him, if you take out that his weight's been going up and down or whatever, but You take away if you darkened his hair back and got rid of his wrinkles, he would still look the same as he did back in the 60s and 70s. But yeah, I've thought about trying to get him on, but there's a reason why he hasn't been on. But anyway, right. So yeah, that's a good pick because we like the people that have been in that market, which is my market because I'm in that market. But anyway, so in fact, it should be noted. Oh, speaking of this, we're gonna go on forever because it's after 9 o'clock now. John, you remember you were all about Jim Ganol, mainly when you were living in Northeast Iowa. Channel 7 was pretty much the station where you didn't watch the other stations. They didn't care about Northeast Iowa. So you didn't watch, say, Channel 9 or Channel 2. Channel 2 had Conrad Johnson. And
I did watch Conrad Johnson because he was just so interesting to watch. You know, he used to write backwards on that glass wall. Yeah, that was pretty cool. So I watch Conrad Johnson sometimes. But yeah, the Waterloo station was the only one that catered to up in Fayette County.
And at the time, I think Denny Ferrari was still at Channel 9 at the time. Yeah. I think, yes.
Yes, you are correct.
And Conrad Johnson, of course, for those that may not know, he was at Channel 2. He was pretty much the first weather person at Channel 2. He's the one who brought radar. I think, from what I remember, Conrad Johnson was the first person west of the Mississippi River to have his own radar for television. He went across the street to what was then Collins Radio and bought a radar. And he put it up. So Channel 2 had the first, supposedly, this is what it says, Channel 2 had the first radar west of the Mississippi River. And this was in 55, supposedly. If you want to bitch about that, that's what they said. So, and he was there until the early 80s. He then retired, moved to Florida. He then passed away in Florida. Denny Ferrari was at Channel 9. Started in 74. He was there until 2006, and he's retired. He now lives in Illinois. He's had a few health problems over the years, but not many. But almost all the people, the old-timers back from when you were in this area, have all gone. All the news people are gone. Everybody's gone. So things are different. Things have changed. It's a lot better off. The thing that I miss most, and I bet you miss it too, that Waterloo used to have a WSR 57, I think it was. And I loved when they had their own radar, because Waterloo had a radar, Des Moines had one, and there was one in the Quad Cities. It's like you could accurately get the radar perspective a lot better than you can now, because the radars are screwed up and the levels are so high and whatnot. So, yeah, I went off on a tangent and that wasted another 10 minutes. But anyway, so we thank everybody for joining us on this episode that never seemingly ended. This is probably the longest episode we've ever done. This is probably nearing 2 hours after we messed up on the first part of it. But anyway, so upcoming guests, I have to look up what our upcoming guests are. Now, next week, and I'll make a mention about this, next week, this is going to be, I got to move this over so I can actually read what I'm supposed to read. Okay. We're hoping to God there's not going to be severe weather next week. Otherwise, Tim Marshall will be on next week talking about engineering, storm chasing, etc., all that other stuff. That is what we're hoping is going to happen next Friday. If not, well, then then Henry has to come up with another rant. And then after that, Tom Coombs from WBND in South Bend, Indiana, will be discussing the 50th anniversary of Palm Sunday 65. And then April 17th, which was just done today, Dave Nussbaum from WWL in New Orleans. We're going to talk about Hurricane Katrina, which the 10-year anniversary of that is this summer. He was in Baton Rouge at the time. And then on Thursday, a Thursday episode, April 23rd, is Fred Gossage from WBRC in Birmingham. That's our reschedule from back in February when Fred couldn't be on because they had winter weather. Eric Wilhelm from WFMJ in Youngstown, Ohio will be on Friday, May 1st. We'll be talking about the 30th anniversary of the big outbreak that occurred at the end of May 1985 in Pennsylvania and Ohio, which included an EF5 or an F5 tornado at the time. And then on Friday, May 15th, Jeff Baskin from KLRT in Little Rock, Arkansas will be on the program at that time, talking about weather in Arkansas, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, and then there's some other empty spots that we may have guests coming up, but that's all we have right now. So if you want to contact us or contact me, I'm on Twitter at IowaWX. I'm on my emails, iowawx@gmail.com. You can find the Iowa Weather Network, which Henry and I both do stuff with, at iawx.net. You can get a hold of Henry. His Twitter account is, ooh, I got to do all this because Henry is kind of here and kind of not. Henry's Twitter account is at Henry C. Luker _WX. He's at, I don't know what his email is. He'd tell you, but he's not on. So he's audio and video. He's messed up. So he's there. So go find him on Twitter. That's where he is. So John, how can people get a hold of you then?
My Twitter is at John Wheeler WDAY. That's easy enough.
So you don't want people to email you like I did.
You can email me too. That's an easy one too. It's the letter J, Wheeler, at WDAY.com. So just J Wheeler at WDAY.com. And welcome any emails too.
Okay, so, and Henry is like sending me stuff. So yeah, if you want to get, send us email to us, Henry and me and Mike, when he ever wants to be back on our program again, whenever he's not busy. You can send it to us at info@iawx.net. That'll go to all of us. That'll include suggestions, show people you'd want to have on, people you wouldn't want to have on. Are we doing a good job? Are we doing a terrible job? Am I just rambling and I should stop rambling? So you can do all of that and send it to us at that point and whatnot. So if there's anything else, and Henry would tell me if there's anything else because I don't think there is, we'll end the show now after about 2 hours and some minutes. So thank you, everybody, and have a warm weekend, even though it may not be warm where you are. It could be warmer than it is where, like if you're in the Southwest, it's warmer there. But if not, everybody have a great weekend, and God bless.